Before we get into today's episode, we just want to preface it with a trigger warning. In this episode, we are talking about sensitive topics such as racial violence and police violence as well, so please do listen at your own discretion.
Hey guys, welcome to the third episode of our podcast, She Said What, where the four of us sit down and have unfiltered conversations about the modern landscape as women, as well as discuss general issues that have been faced by our society. So today we're going to be talking about the Black Lives Matter recently, and it's one that's been talked about a lot. And four of us actually felt that this issue needed to be addressed. It demanded our attention, and it's extremely important. And there's a sense of urgency behind it, and that's actually why we decided to step out of our normal schedule of uploading fortnightly, and we decided to upload a video today. Before we begin, I just wanted to say that this is going to be a little bit of a heavy topic to discuss. It's a little bit of a sensitive issue, and we want to preface this video by saying that, four of us acknowledge that we are not Black ourselves. And so we will never truly be able to understand and, relate to this issue and understand the gravity of issue and what, they've gone through. However, we have tried our best and made our best efforts to educate ourselves on this issue, as well as the people around us, to hopefully try to build awareness and get support for this issue. The aim of our podcast, I just want to say, is to provide an unbiased and kind of holistic perspective on this entire issue. And we will try our best to stick to and follow this aim. However, a lot of the views that are going to be presented are influenced by emotion because we were very hard hit by this entire atrocity that occurred. And so, just know that the opinions are completely our own. And if our interpretations are incorrect or they come across as insensitive, we're deeply, deeply sorry. And please let us know because we definitely don't want to offend anyone or any groups of people in any way. Okay, so let's begin. I'm sure a lot of you know this, but in the last week, a tragedy took place, a crime took place, and a murder took place. So, George Floyd, he's a resident of Minneapolis. He was killed by a white police officer whose name was Derek Chauvin, while three other police officers stood by, watched, and did absolutely nothing. So this took place in broad daylight in the middle of a road, and it was recorded by a teenager. Her name was Daniela, and thank God she recorded it, and thank God this entire issue could come into the light. So what happened was George Floyd, he was at a local convenience store purchasing some cigarettes. I think its name was Cup Food or something, and he allegedly used a counterfeit note. So this resulted in the police being called and arrest was made. But what happened during the course of this arrest was inhuman and it was unacceptable. This police officer, Derek Chauvin, he placed his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Like, just let that sink in. Even after Mr. Floyd was unresponsive, he continued to do so. Finally, bystanders kept saying check his pulse and things. And finally, he was taken to a hospital where he was declared dead about an hour later. This triggered a wave of protest, not just, the thing is that it was not just within the country, but across the world, in an effort to hopefully bring justice to what happened to George Floyd and bring justice to his family, and just in support of the entire Black Lives Matter movement in general. So a couple of things that really stood out was, first of all, one of the police officers who, yeah, he stood by, he did nothing, was an Asian himself. He's a member of the minority community himself, and still he decided to just watch. And I think towards the end, he actually brought out a knife against the bystanders. And I don't know, this, it just made me feel so enraged. And then secondly, a little bit of backstory if you want to go into. George Floyd had a history of a couple crimes that he had committed. He'd been sentenced to prison in the middle for about 5 years. And the thing is, with this entire issue, first of all, it was alleged that he had used a counterfeit note. We don't even know if that's the truth. And second of all, toxicology reports, things like that have not come out yet. And so we don't know if he was really under the influence or not, because that's what the police officers are claiming at this point. And there's so many kind of loose ends. But at the same time, we need to know that regardless of what he didn't deserve what happened to him. He didn't deserve to be killed, to be murdered. It was not up to the police, that police officer, to decide what was his fate. Because if you think about it, there are a lot of like serial killers and things who have been escorted away in a peaceful, respectable manner. And this, what happened to this black man, it's completely atrocious, completely horrific and unacceptable.
Exactly. And we know that the motivation for the crime, for the murder, was not actually his usage of a counterfeit note. Like, the motivation was the police officer's prejudice. Like, he didn't kill him because of his alleged crime of forgery, but he killed him because, like, he believed that George Floyd being black in and of itself was a crime. And I just want to say that, like, so many times, this isn't the first time that it's happened. And, like, how can people, after for such a small thing, and maybe, okay, this one time, the man in question was actually being accused of something, but so many other times, there have been literally no accusations. Like, people are going birding, people are going on a walk, and they've just been killed. Like, what is your excuse then? Can you still justify what has happened to them? At the end of the
Exactly, and
day, it
I
is a hate crime.
Exactly, and I feel like if this is how things are going to be, like, how is anyone going to be safe, right? Especially for Black people, and not just Black people, like minorities. There's this persistent fear they can't go out of their house. There's always this lingering fear, like something might happen. They can't do things as freely as white people might do.
Yeah, but if you look at it specifically, like with like the oppression of black people, there's an entire history of racial oppression in the United States. So first there was obviously like all the people in Africa were like moved to the United States so that they could be slaves for white people, right? And eventually Abraham Lincoln did become president. There was an abolition of slavery and all of that. But as soon as slavery was abolished, there was suddenly this entire power dynamic, this struggle in white people's heads, because yesterday itself, like, they were treating these people as their slaves, but today they're expected to treat them as equals. That entire struggle in their minds continued, and it led to a lot of discrimination. So even if you look at it, after the abolition of slavery and all of that, the black people were given different buses, different schools, and they were basically segregated, right? And black people were cut off from normal society, even though they were supposed to be equal. But even after that, Martin Luther King had come, and then he really, really advocated for equal rights, and he's brought like the black people standing to a current like situation, to a current place. But even now, if you look at it, this entire power struggle in these people's minds is still persistent, and I feel like that's what's causing them to act out like this. That's what's causing them to, like, execute all of these hate crimes against the black community.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think life as a minority, it's very, very difficult. And particularly life as a Black minority in USA, as we've seen with the history and things, it's so hard, and they have to undergo so many atrocities, so many crimes, so much violence. And so they need someone to help them. They need someone to support them, someone who's on their side. And, if in this case it's not going to be the community, I think that they need at least some kind of authority, like a police figure, hopefully, to be on their side. But as we've seen in this issue, the police was completely against them. It was the police who, propagated this issue. It was the police who kind of committed the hate crime in this case, and that's so terrible. Like, the police, like, what was he thinking? Like, this is a man's life, and you can't just do this. Regardless of the crime he committed, what happened to him was not at all justified. The action that was taken was not at all justified. The police has no right to be the judge, the jury, like the executioner. It's horrible.
Exactly. And, like, what do you do when the people you are supposed to go to for protection are the people you need protection from? Like, at the end of the day, there's implicit brutality and like racism just so deeply embedded in the way that policing takes place. Like, every action that they bring up is kind of influenced by this. And the system, we know this, but it's filled with inequality and injustice. And the government and the local governments, they are not taking action fast enough and not taking action that is influential enough to change this. And it's not just, at the end of the day, it's not just an attack on black people. Like, it's an attack on civil society and everything that society's been built on. Like, what are our foundations? Our foundations are justice and equality, and the fact that everyone deserves the right to live. Like, that is the basic thing. And how can you just ignore that? Then what is the point of anything?
And the fact that police officers, right, adding on to Risha, like, they are supposed to be the ones that give us justice, the ones that keep us safe. Like, it didn't even pass their mind that what they were doing is so wrong and like vile. And they were so oblivious to what they were doing, they didn't even hesitate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, people may argue that like it's not all police officers. Like, there are some good officers who genuinely are doing their job, and we have seen that in videos all over Instagram, YouTube, things like that. We have seen that there are genuinely some good police officers who are protecting the protesters. They're really trying to work for what police officers are supposed to do. But I mean, at the end of the day, what's really annoying me is that it shouldn't be some police officers who are bad. It shouldn't be some police officers who are good. At the end of the day, when you sign up to become a police officer, you are working to protect your people, to help your people. Irrespective of their racial background, their sexual orientation, you're supposed to help your people. When it comes to police officers, you can't make excuses and say there are just some bad police officers. They are not supposed to be there to begin with. The police as a system should just be unbiased and should protect the nation as a whole, should protect their population as a whole.
Yeah, like completely, police officers, they take an oath to protect, they are bound by law to serve, and it's, their responsibility. And I've seen like across social media, Instagram and stuff, I saw so many videos of what the police have been doing during the protests. So for example, there was this old man, and he was basically walking away from the protest, and he had a cane in his hand and all. And then this police officer comes, and he just hits, like, he like pushes him to the ground, and he sprays pepper spray on him. I mean, what is the mindset behind that? And in a second case, there was this girl. I think she was literally in college or maybe even a teenager, and all of them are peaceful protesters, either walking away from the protest. She was holding a little card, a little poster, and this police officer comes on a horse and tramples over her. And I think she ended up breaking a couple bones in her legs. Like, it was so sad to just see the video. And oh my god, I saw this one thing about how, so there was this woman, and she was holding her child in one arm and a placard in the other arm. And the police was so brutal, they took the child and pulled, like, grabbed him and manhandled him and basically dragged him away from his mother. He was crying, he was saying, mommy, don't let mommy leave, mommy can't leave, she didn't do anything wrong. And that's the fact, she didn't do anything wrong, she was peacefully standing there. And there's no need for violence if you don't already see violence occurring. I agree that in some cases the police, like the protests have gotten to a stage where it's a bit dangerous and it's a bit violent, and so you need police to come in. But especially if there is no violence, I don't see the need at all.
Yeah, no, and to the extent of it, right? Like, it really, really triggers me because I saw this one thing. There was this one pregnant woman who was attending some of the protests and things like that. She's pregnant, she is carrying a child, but still the police officer has shoved her to the ground and caused a miscarriage. Like, for what fault? What is she doing? For standing up for regular, like, human rights? Is that some reason to, like, cause a miscarriage? Like, I'm not understanding. Is something not connecting?
Exactly. And like when you become a police officer, there needs to be some sense of morality. Like you need to know that this is right and this is wrong. Like in some things, I feel like that it really is black and white, and this is one of them. And more than that, literally, they're using tear gas in the middle of a respiratory disease pandemic. People can't breathe as it is. Like people are dying because of it. And then on top of that, they're aggravating the problem by using tear gas. I don't understand. And they're asserting power over innocent people. Like they haven't done anything, they're just asserting this power because they have it and they just want to use it. And it's not random violence. Like it's not that they're just generally really violent people, but we know from like past instances that this is directed violence that's really backed by such deep discrimination. And again, one of the things I want to talk about, like we keep talking about the problem but not the solution. I feel like one thing that will just really really help the situation is regulating policing in general. And like we just need to make the police more accountable. Like why are they held to a different set of standards? Why do they have a whole different set of laws? I feel like genuinely, like, do you guys know what qualified immunity is? Basically it shields the police from lawsuits, and it kind of allows them to adhere to a different set of standards than normal people. And maybe I do understand the basis for it, but in the process, because of that, what's happening is the police don't go to jail. They just feel that they can do whatever they want. Like they think that anything that they're doing is justified, and they have no consequences at the end of the day. So they have no fear of while taking action. Like I don't think that's okay.
Exactly, and I feel like these kind of things make you feel like what is going on right now. Like, and in terms of reaction, like there's a large amount of hypocrisy involved. The response is so filtered. People react a certain way just because other people are reacting. You know what I mean? Like, there's this very common thing I've noticed. So there's two types of people. There's many people who outside America that think that Black Lives Matter movement isn't as important in their respective countries because they aren't experiencing it. They aren't massively going through it themselves. And there's this other kind of people who are just a part of it, part of the movement because everyone is being a part of it, like fake woke.
Yeah, and then okay, so now this is our podcast. We're trying to be apolitical, but like this is what I saw. It's that I want to talk about President Donald Trump and his response to this entire issue. He actually issued a statement where he said he is disappointed in the governor of Minneapolis and Minnesota, and he believes that he's been too weak in terms of his response. And he actually said that I will provide the military, and military is on your side, and you need to crank down on these protesters. And basically, he was basically instigating violence in another way. And how can a president make these kind of claims? I'm not able to understand. And then secondly, guys, he said that all the protesters are going to be given a 10-year prison sentence, depending on the, obviously depending on the degree, but still a 10-year sentence. And here's the thing, in a democracy, you're supposed to be allowed to express your views and opinions. It is your right to do so. And so, in a democracy, suppose a democracy at this point, where dissent is being criminalized, that's when you know that the entire issue is really taking a turn for the worse. Because, as I said, like, the military and stuff, you being used against the citizens, their job is to protect citizens. And if you're kind of saying that I support the use of military, it's really like negating the whole problem. How can you use violence to solve a violent crime? It doesn't work that way.
He's saying things like crank down on them, and like the governor is not being hard enough. But like, what are you doing? The governor, maybe he isn't taking action, but Trump is literally sitting there and taking negative action. Like, he's evicting protesters from parks, and he's just not letting them do things. He's, like Risha said, he's just giving them such heavy duty military equipment, the policemen, and he's just letting them do whatever they want. He's trying to quell the protests. He's not understanding the need for them. And then he's saying that the governor is not being hard enough. I don't get it.
Yeah, and if you look at it, right, like it's not even him like saying like, yeah, these people are good, these people are bad, right? But just the way he's talking about them, like with the white protesters, he was like, yeah, these are quite peaceful people. They are just very passionate about what they're talking about and things like that. Here, literally, a man was murdered. Like, what the heck? He's saying that all of these people who are protesting for the Black Lives Matter movement are like thugs who are dishonoring George Floyd's legacy. Like, what is not clicking in his head is what I'm not able to understand. And not just Trump's head, right? Like, there are so many other people who are being very, very hypocritical in their response to the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, we see people around us, like even in today's world, teenagers, people who are slightly older than teenagers, whatever, there are people who actively try to appropriate black culture. They look up to black people. They try their level best to fit into the black community, right? Like, they listen to Travis Scott. They try to embody black people in their like fashion sense. And some people even go to the extent of using the N word. Like, when you're appropriating black culture to such an extent, why are you having such a problem speaking up about the issue? And even if you're not going to speak up about the issue, right, at least do your part to like help, do your part, sign the petitions, do all of that. But these people are just sitting back and they're just watching this entire show go down. On the other hand, there are people who are appropriating black culture, but at the same time they're putting their stuff up on social media about like, yes, this matters, and like, we care about it. But do you genuinely care about it if you're sitting back and appropriating the N word in black culture as a whole? Like, that's a little bit hypocritical to me. Like, again, as Krisha said, like, it's sort of fake woke. Like, I feel like they're only posting all of this on their social media, if they even do. They're only posting it because it's like cool to be woke or whatever that's supposed to mean.
Exactly. Like, do they actually care? Because, and I've heard so many people, or like so many of my friends here in India saying that, why are we doing so much for it? Like, why are we talking so much about it? Why is it an us issue? Like, it doesn't affect us directly. Like, that is not true, because we know that to such a great extent, the problem exists in the Indian community as well. Like, I have seen, it's my family, it's in my family as well, like with my grandparents, my extended family. Being Black is not being beautiful, like, that's really not working. And I just think we keep saying that, like, yeah, we're in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, but like, even in the Indian community, I don't want to get into this, but like, because of British oppression and everything, we have not been grown up being like, we've not grown up believing that Black can be beautiful. Like, we still use things like kala as like an insults, and like we use things like kala as an insult, and we just say that like saying things like that are okay, and we don't actually think when saying words like these, but it really isn't fine.
Yeah, and like in terms of like these derogatory terms, and stuff, I think we have no right to use these words because we don't understand the weight, we don't understand the history behind such words. I mean, these words are powerful, they're so powerful. Um, and I just, okay, so like one more thing is that, so for example, I actually read this quote, right? And it basically said that the N word is sometimes, a lot of times, it's the last word that millions and millions of these African American people they heard before they were brutally murdered, before they were killed by their white oppressors. And so I don't think, oh well, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I just feel like I don't have the right to use such a word because like where, you know, it's come from such a huge history, it has such a like such an enormous amount of weight and meaning behind it. And so that's the whole thing with like cultural appropriation. How can you just use the term and believe you're part of it when you've gone through nothing, when you've lived a privileged life, when you don't have, you know, your ancestors haven't been through the same struggle? Then like I said, like you just don't have the right.
It's not even about like you haven't been through stuff, like you can't use that word. It's about that word having so much of a heavy meaning, and by black people using that word, that's them taking control of their past, that's them really coming into their own. But how can you just, I feel like people who are using the N word, right, you don't know the history behind that word. You can't just use it as some kind of like slang word or as some kind of like derogatory word. Like, no, that's not yours to use.
Exactly, and more than that, it's just when black people use it, the intent behind it is very different. When black people use it, it's empowering, and when like others use it, it's literally just demeaning, derogatory, and it's trying to take them back to a very dark and horrible place in their lives. Like that's not okay. Why do you want to do that to people?
I know, and then the thing is that it's actually so prevalent in just South Asian culture itself. So I want to, you know, I know most of our audience are people from the Indian subcontinent and stuff. And so, like, Inika, I think you said this, but a lot of people think, in terms of the issue, that why should we kind of stand up and like, it's an issue that it's more, you know, geared towards the United States and things, and so there's no need for us to participate. I think that's completely wrong. I think that's a wrong mindset to have. And that, like, I think people should know this, but there have been so many cases of racial discrimination even within our own country. So there was this African American man. I'm not entirely sure where he's from, but I think his home country originally was Nigeria. And so he came to India. This happened a couple years ago, and he actually wrote this open letter out, which basically said how stated his feelings. And so at first, he was really, really excited to come to India. He thought, "Wow, like this is the land of Mahatma Gandhi. This is going to be an amazing change for me. I won't face the same issues here, hopefully." But when he came here, he was faced by so much cruelty, so much anger. He didn't get rent, for example, like rent givers. Like they didn't give him rent because they called him these terms such as like I don't want, okay, they called him Kalu and things. And it's just like he was in America for a couple times. Like it's just the same issues here in India as well. And so you can't just kind of, you know, turn your back on the issue and be like, yeah, this is nothing that happens in India, because it does happen and people don't realize that.
Exactly. And these things, like adding on to you, Risha, these things happen in India as well. But the problem is that no one realizes the weight of the issue. Nobody realizes how important this is right now. And something needs to be done about it right now. So, like, a lot of Indian celebrities, right, on Twitter, Instagram, they wanna put this image that they're a part of this movement, that they're showing support. But do they actually mean it? Do they actually support it? Because we know how in Indian culture, you know, you want to be white, you want to endorse fairness creams and stuff like that. When you do stuff like that, how can you be so like different in your ideology when you're endorsing creams and stuff which make you fair, and you yourself are saying that black people should be given equal rights when you're not following it yourself? How are you supposed to put it out on social media? I mean, this is completely fake. Like, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, and I feel like with Indian culture specifically, like Inika spoke about this, but there's sort of this deep rooted ideology that black is not beautiful. And if like no matter how sad that sounds, that's the mindset that's literally plagued India, right? And all of these Indian celebrities are just advertising for fairness creams and doing all of these commercials and things like that. But then at the end of the day, they're coming back home and posting about Black Lives Matter. Like that's very, very hypocritical in my eyes.
Exactly. And even with Indian celebrities, I feel like so many people, they haven't taken the time out to actually educate themselves. They're just posting what they're seeing on the internet without actually going to the depths of like actually knowing what's wrong. With so many people, then like you said, they're fake woke, they don't know what's happening, they're not contributing to the issue positively in any way, they're just talking about it.
Yeah, and with like Sara Ali Khan, right? Like she posted all lives matter, right? And I feel like we are not trying to say all lives do not matter. Lives do matter, right? But at the end of the day, the black community is being actively oppressed right now, and we cannot stand and watch this. I feel like people are just taking this as an opportunity to be like, no, look at my problems. Like my community has this. This is what's happening with me. Like be a little bit selfless and try to support this Black Lives Matter movement. I feel like people who are just propagating the idea of like all lives matter, they're not really understanding what the ideology behind Black Lives Matter is, and that's what's really pissing me off. But like those are all like one kind of protesters, right? At the same time, there are other people who are actually going to the protests who are really like showing a sense of camaraderie between all of them. Like if you look at the protests in the US and things like that, there's a whole like atmosphere with them. Like there's like, I mean, I've seen like all over Instagram, TikTok, things like that. Like the entire sense of unity that's there at these protests is something that I really, really admire.
Exactly, and I feel like these protests are not just like involving just black people standing up for themselves, but there's so many white people and people from different cultures who are standing up for black people, not just in America but around the world, who are trying to like take a stand and voice their opinion, because now is the time, right? Now is when you can change this.
Like, if you're going to be aggressive or like violent and things like that, you can't not expect the police to act in return. But I strongly feel that whatever anger these people are acting out of is justified. I feel like you can't you can't expect them to just sit peacefully and like, I don't know, I'm really like butchering what I'm trying to say, but I feel like you can't expect them to not be angry about the situation. At the end of the day, a man was killed in cold blood. The situation could have been handled a lot more differently. And the way the things played out, people are going to be mad. So their reactions aren't unexpected, is my point.
Exactly. I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you that their anger is justified. But I still think that even though your anger is justified, you don't necessarily need to express it violently. Like how, like Risha said, how can you solve a violent issue by violence? Like that's not how it works. And just how is destruction of property helping justice? Like it's just harming more innocent people. It's they're kind of like ruining small businesses, and that's not helping anyone. Like the government isn't going to do anything. You're fighting for your issue, but in the process you're harming people who've done nothing wrong. And I feel like more than that, it's just so many people are talking about the looting and the like burning of buildings that's going on, and that's obviously not okay. But what Trump and like a lot of people who don't support Black Lives Matter have been trying to say is that the protests aren't okay because of the level of like aggression that's there, and they're generalizing the whole protest by saying that like there's been such horrible things going on. But how can you generalize the protest? But when we say that police brutality is not okay and that so many policemen have way too much power and they're not doing things the way they're supposed to be done, everyone's like, no, it's just a few. Like, yeah, okay, maybe here also there's just a few. How can you be so hypocritical? How can you have two completely different stances on two similar things? Like, do you just support whatever supports your cause? If that's not how it's supposed to be, keep a clear mind.
Exactly, I feel like violence isn't the answer to this, because it's a really broad issue. Like you can't react to it with violence because that's already been going on. How can you react with it in the same way, right? Like literally, I feel like every person on this planet has to have rights. They need to feel safe, they need to be treated equally and need to be given a voice. And I feel like to an extent that's what people are fighting for right now. So but again, violence isn't why you can't use violence to get your right. It's been granted to you, just voice it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? I feel like if the people were actually there at the protests to like see the entire atmosphere that's being built by the protesters, like there's such unity with all of them. Like they may come from completely different backgrounds, but the entire sense of like camaraderie and unity that's there during these protests is something that's really unparalleled. And it's not like there haven't been protests before, right? But this time I feel like it's completely different given the circumstances.
Exactly, and I think this time there is so much potential. We can really, really make change because everyone's just come together, and I feel like there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Like there's just now we're still going through it. Actually, we've just been navigating a pandemic, and there's been so much fear, so much concern in the society about what is going on and like what is going to come. And there's so many people who have sick families, sick friends, and in general, like the atmosphere is just so desolate, and they're just worried about what is going to happen. There's lost jobs, people are struggling, everyone's fed up, and I think they're so done with the government not having a clear plan of action and not addressing the problems that the average American faces on a daily basis. And because this in general is such an impactful and personal period, they've become more sensitive and I want to say more receptive to the issues that are taking place. And I feel like so many people who wouldn't ordinarily go out and march on the streets have now, they're really seeing the problem because everyone's just been through such a tough time. And I think in addition to that, people who would be at work right now, they have the time to like make time for change. They can go out and like fight on the streets. They're worried about the family around them, and so they're putting in more of an effort to kind of go out and just really fight with everything they have. Another thing that's really making this so different is the fact that it's a youth-led movement. And Gen Z guys, we've grown up around this. We've grown up seeing atrocities like this, and we're just so fed up with it. We're so angry, and like Risha said, because we're so done, social media is really, really, really helping us grow and just connect with everyone and build so much more support.
And then one thing I just want to say is that, throughout this entire conversation, we've been talking about social media and like how we saw this Instagram post or how we saw this YouTube video. And that's the thing. I just want to talk about how social media has such an immense power and it's such a benefit in some ways to our society because it really truly has the power to unite us, even though we're across the world from what's going on, we're still trying to show our support. And in terms of support, I think us not even just like everyone has a responsibility, us teenagers, all of the audience, we have a privilege, right? And so it's not a question of you can show support, it's more of a question of you should show support for this issue. We have to get justice for what happened to George Floyd. We have to get justice for his 5 children, for his girlfriend, we have to get justice for the thousands of oppressed people who lost their lives in a similar way.
Okay, guys, so that brings us to the end of today's episode of our podcast. But before you leave, we just want to say something to all of you. If you've listened up till this point of the episode, you would have understood the level of traction that this movement has garnered. And at the end of the day, we do not want this traction to stop. So if you're listening to this right now, and even if you aren't a member of the Black community, we urge every single one of you to take action. That can be in the form of signing petitions, donating to organizations, sending out text messages, sending out emails, or even just educating yourself and the people around you can have such a large impact. We'll be putting a link in the description box of this episode, and we'll also be uploading a post soon so that you can become more aware about the ways in which you can help out. But guys, contribute to the cause, because at the end of the day, this is not about black versus white. This is about human beings versus racism.